Everybody Hates Rand is a Wheel of Time podcast that will contain spoilers for all 14 books. So if you're anti-spoiler, stop this, read all 14 books, and come back. We'll be here, waiting.
Our title is a joke and is meant to be taken as such. Everybody in this context refers to us and our cats. You are free to feel however you want about Rand. He's a fictional character. Please don't DM us.
The world is a mess, Dark One stretching out his hand. The dragon's reborn, the fire's been fanned, but everybody hates Rand. Everybody hates Rand. Everybody hates Rand.
But yeah, this is Everybody Hates Rand, I guess.
Allegedly.
Your friendly neighborhood Wheel of Time podcast. I don't know, I'm saying it like a question. I'm Emily Jushaw. I know that for sure.
I'm Sally Goodger. I also know that for sure.
We are in a slow spot, technically speaking, in Winter's Heart. After the Golem attacks, there aren't any physical attacks. Well, there aren't any.
There are not any more street fights.
There are not any more lethal physical attacks against, or lethally intended physical attacks against Matt's person. He is, of course, repeatedly being attacked by Tylan in a sexual sense, but he is alive, and we can say that for him. There are some real ups and downs of these two chapters. On the up hand. Mm-hmm. On the up hand, it's very fun to have Matt introduce Noel to the rest of the surviving members of the Band of the Red Hand. As Matt tells us, he came in with 12 or so guys, and they're down to 3, plus Harnan, who's kind of the captain, and Vannon, who's sort of part of the Band of the Red Hand, but more like a contractor.
Yeah.
He's a former horse thief. We've talked about him before.
He's the best.
Yeah, I love Vannon. He's just a great little character.
Just the idea of being a horse thief is really funny to me.
I know. And Matt's just he's just incredibly good at his job.
Yeah.
And just incredibly weird, and I love him. And I'm like, it sounds like every single one of your boyfriends, Matt.
Yeah, I just, I know in a world where horses are extremely important for transportation, being a horse thief is a big deal.
Yeah, but is it like is the modern equivalent being a Grand Theft Auto expert?
Yeah, is Vannon out here committing Grand Theft?
Is Vannon Paul Walker in Fast and Furious?
Fast and Furious. Too fast, too Vannon.
Stealing. I guess Vin Diesel. Paul Walker's the straight-laced guy, at least at first.
Yeah, he'd be Vin Diesel.
R.I.P. Paul Walker.
I know now. I want to map Now I want to map the whole Band of the Red Hand onto the Fast and Furious cast, but that is a project for another time, I suppose.
I can't remember any of their names except Harnan, but I love the descriptions of the 3 surviving members of the Band of the Red Hand, because there's 2 guys who are just normal, and then the 3rd guy is just an absolute idiot.
Yeah, total dumbass.
And Matt's just he's kind of clueless, but I love him.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's a nice little section. It is nice to have Matt interacting with people he is friendly with, or even people who he just has nice working relationships with. His and Julian's interaction is kind of funny.
Yeah.
As it is, it at the very least is inoffensive. It's just him and Julian kind of sniping at each other in a fraternal way. And he and Stalanon are of course always very cute together. I also like the montage format of the second chapter, and I enjoy getting updates on what everyone is doing. Mm-hmm. Of course, the big downer in this chapter is that we are introduced to Tuon, and Tylan, of course, is back, and there is a lot of allusions to the sexual assault that Tylan is committing against Matt. The title is called Pink Ribbons, and the insinuation is that Matt will be tied up bondage style with, I guess, pink ribbons. unfortunately, I have seen fan art of this, and I'm not quite sure why this is what everyone has decided to fixate on, except that maybe it's the most specific sexual act that we get from them, but Robert Jordan clearly is framing it to be slightly titillating.
Yeah.
And once you have sort of overcome the hurdle of thinking of this not as a fun BDSM relationship, which those are great, those are fun, but this is not that. This is a sexual harasser and their victim.
Yes.
Once you sort of overcome that hurdle, then the pink ribbons thing stops being fun and interesting and starts just being like, oh, that's disgusting and upsetting.
It's like truly horrific.
And a tool of rape.
Yeah, I really don't know why that is something people have fixated on. But every time I see fan art, I just want to freak out.
I mean, yeah, I do. Like, the Kill Bill sirens go off in my head.
Yeah. There's nothing else to say besides just really gross.
Just gag. But moving chronologically, I guess. Matt and Noel get to the Terracin Palace.
Yeah, our boy Noel.
Yeah, our boy Noel. Love him. Love him to death. They are making for where the Band of the Red Hand is quartered, just in this sort of like barracks outside of the palace or adjacent to the palace. And that takes them past or through the stable yard, which is also where the demon are being quote-unquote exorcised. Much like when prisoners in a prison are let out into the yard for daily exercise. They're like being walked about between Zildam. Matt gives us some sort of brutal descriptions of the brainwashing that is taking place. He specifically notes Teslin, who we met in Crown of Swords as one of Aleda's 2 Aes Sedai who were stationed in Ebudar. So 2 of the only Aes Sedai who were in Ebudar who didn't get out with Elaine and Nynaeve's group. The other one was Jolene. And Matt doesn't mention her, and we haven't seen her yet. Although, of course, she will come back. But Teslin, Matt feels for her, I think is fair to say.
Yeah, absolutely.
But much like the occupation in general, is pretty pragmatic about the situation, knows that it would be suicide, really, to try and help any of the Daman at this point.
Yeah.
And he notes, I don't know how relevant this is, but he just notes that, like, it will be relevant for later when Matt starts interacting with Teslin again. But Teslin has not been, quote-unquote, broken. Her brainwashing has not been completed.
Yes.
She is still clearly... She's not actively fighting back, but she is passively, internally resisting what is happening to her.
Yes.
And Matt sees that clearly. And so, like, they make eye contact, and she just, like, glares at him.
Yeah.
And he's just like, okay, keep fighting the good fight, I guess.
Like 10-4, buddy.
10-4, good buddy.
Same.
Wow,
Ken.
Wow. But they go to where the barracks are. They have to, like, pass some guys who stop and talk to Matt. This is the first guy who tells Matt, oh, you should get cleaned up before you see Tylan, because she'll be upset otherwise. It pisses Matt off because he is contrarian in this. And I mean, you know, it's a form of resistance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Being dirty when everyone is telling you that your captor will be upset to see you dirty. But yeah, this is also just sort of like generally how Matt is with authority.
Yeah, and yes, true, correct. Yeah, and it's one of, I think, the more charming, roguish aspects of him, that he's like, I'm not going to, like, make myself presentable just because you have certain expectations of what people look like. And I'm like, hell yeah.
Yeah, one is reminded, or at least I am reminded of Matt in the White Tower in Book 3, just sort of his general reactions to authority figures around the White Tower, and his sort of slippery nature around all of them. Matt is one of the things that most upsets him about his relationship with Tylan is that everyone in the Terracin Palace knows about it, which is, of course, an extended form of the humiliation that he is undergoing. He's being held up as a figure of public ridicule.
Yeah.
As well as being privately humiliated.
Ah, that's such a good way to put it, Emily. The humiliation factor of their relationship is something I don't think I've ever fully, like, put into words until you just said that. Like, a lot of the power that she's exercising over him depends on humiliating him.
Yeah. And we've mentioned this before, but, like, because of Tylen's place in the power structure, she is able to use all of the servants and all of the staff of the Terrasen Palace as sort of, like, extra limbs. So her power extends throughout this entire building. Like, the entire architecture of it is designed to trap Matt in that way. So that, of course, makes everything more difficult and more humiliating for him. Matt talks a lot less, and I don't think we get it as blatantly, but there would also be a humiliation factor of everyone he knows and is friends with being aware of this relationship. And we saw that a little bit with, like, him and Elena Nynaeve. He seems a little less concerned about it when it comes to, like, Tom and Julian.
Yeah.
Or maybe he just, like, hasn't internalized it, but that would certainly be upsetting. That a bunch of people you know are aware of what's happening to you and either don't see a problem with it or aren't doing anything to help you.
Yeah, I think one of the worst parts about this arc is that there is no one who is willing to believe Matt or help Matt in regards to this situation. Like, none of the servants are like, this is extremely fucked up, I don't want to participate in this. Like, I know this is my employer, but I'm going to find some way to, like, I don't know, feed this man when he's being starved out by the kitchens. Or, like, Tom is never like, time to play the fatherly figure here and be like, are you okay? Like, nobody reaches that hand out to Matt.
Yeah, and it's a form of gaslighting that is being extended toward Matt to sort of, like, normalize this relationship.
Yeah.
And just sort of in his friends' non-reaction, and in Bestselling thinking it's totally normal, and all of the Abu Dhabi people seeming to think it's totally normal. But it's also a form of gaslighting that Robert Jordan is doing to us.
Yes.
Normalizing this.
Preach.
And yeah, you're right. No one ever really... We get, I think, what is the first person saying straight out to Matt what Tylen is doing is wrong with Satala Nan.
Mm-hmm.
And she brackets that by saying, oh, well, it's a tradition to have this sort of, like, sugar daddy relationship, you know, with young people and older people in positions of power. That's a tradition in Abu Dar, or, you know, something that a lot of people do, but it is not correct and not part of tradition that she is keeping you there against your will. But again, Robert Jordan brackets that with some humor in having, like, Satala Nan, like, make Matt twirl to show his dumb little outfit that Tylen is forcing him to wear, which it's hard to think about. I have a hard time with Matt's little outfits here because we're told that they are very flamboyant and on a certain level they are, like, meant to be, like, slutty outfits.
Mm-hmm.
Like, showing his butt and stuff like that. But since we're doing, like, not medieval, you know, 17th century, 18th century, where, you know, it's not like Matt's wearing a crop top and short shorts.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit harder for me to conceptualize how, like, humiliating this clothing would be.
Yeah.
Because to me, I'm just like, oh, it's just what he normally wears, just cut differently.
Yeah, it's just pants and a coat.
You know, so I'm brightly colored, I'm sure, but as he tells us, but maybe Sarah McClintock can offer us some insight into what constitutes slutty wear for
Wheelie World
for men in this era. Anyway, Matt and Noel are trying to get into the Band of the Red Hands when the barracks when some Shanshan, like, ride up to do something. And Matt immediately is like, gets Noel away. And Noel clearly isn't familiar with the Shanshan per se. Like, he has been living in this occupation, but Matt has to tell him about, like, the concept of listeners.
Yeah.
And things like that. And Noel has a really interesting reaction here where Matt says that he seems annoyed with himself. That he didn't understand that or know that. And it's just, like, a facet of Noel's character that I find interesting. As we later find out, much later in the series, Noel is Jain Farstrider, who is this renowned adventurer type guy. Sort of an Indiana Jones retired.
Yeah.
Who's written, like, books and everything about his exploits. So it's interesting to see this aspect, like, of a character who did a lot of stuff in their youth, so to speak, who is aging. I just think Noel sort of reflects... Tom is a little bit OP, if that makes sense. Like, he's an old man, but he's extremely spry. He doesn't have any, like, mental problems that normally come with aging. He doesn't seem to be aging at all.
Yeah.
But Noel is very much an old man who, like, has some disabilities. He walks with a stoop and a limp, I think. And due to compulsion and various things that have happened to him, or due to old age, he isn't quite as with it as he was in his youth.
Yeah.
And that frustrates him, because he's aware of it. I don't know, I just find it interesting.
Yeah, it is really interesting, and I just wish that it was a little bit more clear how much of this was just Noel as a person aging and dealing with that, and how much of it was the compulsion/brainwashing thing that went on. That's kind of like underwriting this plot in a way that's never fully articulated.
Yeah, so frustrating.
Because it's like that, like, either way we want to, cut it, it's really interesting to deal with a person who's like, my memory and my ability to make connections is not what I want it to be for whatever reason. And I just kind of like wish not that you need to have a reason, but I wish I just knew where to direct my attention about it.
Yeah, it would be great if we were given any sort of understanding about this at all besides Matt's occasional observations. When he obviously doesn't have the full story. Anyway, Matt comes in and introduces Noel to the rest of the gang. And they're all just like, oh, hey, cool. Hi, Noel.
Man, what's up?
Especially once Noel very adeptly tells the story of the Golem attack. And Matt's just like, oh, he is a born storyteller. Yeah. I'm like, of course he is. He's a bestseller.
Yeah.
New York Times bestseller.
He's a Pulitzer, Matt.
He's a Kyrian and bestseller. Jain Farstrider over here tells the story of the Golem attack, and Matt's like, okay, so clearly the Golem is back, so I have been thinking that you guys should leave the city. One of Matt's more heroic things is that, of course, even though he sort of wants support, he wants to get his guys out of the city, because although he is aware that the Golem is focused on him, the Golem will also kill anyone who gets in the way. And in a very sweet show of support, every member of the Band of the Red Hand is like, of course we're not leaving. And someone is like, Talmonese would kick our ass if we came back without you. Which is
very sweet and romantic.
Good. But they're like, yeah, Matt, we're not leaving. And Matt's like, okay, well, thanks, guys. He then goes to, go to bed, whatever.
Yeah, snoozle time. I wish it was snoozle time. Instead, the two worst women you know. Oh, sorry.
That's fine. On his way up to the rooms he shares with Tylen, sort of, I guess, near the upper portion of the palace. The palace is sort of constructed class level. Upper class is going to be higher in the palace.
Yeah.
Lower class, lower. Matt runs into Julian, who he does not expect to see at this place, he does not expect to see in this particular part of the palace. And he's like, what the fuck is going on? He's like, hey, Julian, just so you know, the Golem is back. And Julian's like, dang, that sucks. And Matt's like, are you having, like, a little affair? And Julian's like, shut up, Matt. You look stupid. And Matt's like, bah!
Matt's like, I know I look stupid.
I know, come on.
You don't have to tell me.
You rat bastard. I was just like, okay, goodbye, Julian.
Yeah, I mean, goodbye, Julian is...
This is, only being alluded to at this point, but Julian has discovered Amathera, the former... This is such ridiculous.
I know.
Imagine saying this sentence. The former Panarch of Terabon, who was taken as a slave by the Shanshan, and Julian has found her, and now they're having an affair, I guess.
Yeah.
Apparently they had chemistry in the original book, but I don't think we ever saw them interact.
Yeah, I was like, did they even meet?
The only thing we heard about it was that Julian said she's pretty. And everyone was like, okay.
I say lots of people are pretty, and yet I do not end up having illicit affairs with them.
I will fuck the former Panarch of Terabon. Whatever. Robert Jordan and your compulsive need to pair people off.
Yeah.
Shakespeare style.
You do not have full humanity unless you have a romantic partner.
I mean, Julian is hardly a character to begin with, so... And neither is Amathera, so I guess they're perfect for each other. Just the two flattest characters.
I know Amathera has done really dirty, I think.
God bless her.
I mean, first of all, being taken captive and forced to be basically the equivalent of a serving girl, which is in Shanshan society also deeply humiliating because you basically serve naked.
Yeah.
It's a very sexualized and dehumanizing thing, which is especially hard for, I mean, I think it would be hard for anybody, but I think the idea is supposed to be it's especially hard and humiliating for Amathera because she came from such a position of power. And then this was deeply traumatizing to her, so she's a very anxious, skittish person now. And Matt, where I'm at, I just finished Crossroads of Twilight. Matt and other people comment on, like, how frustrating it is that she won't just, like, get it together. And it's like,
nobody...
Are you kidding me?
Yeah,
like,
nobody handles trauma the same way. Give this woman some grace.
And also, like, you've had no idea. Like, you've never had to do it. You don't know what you would respond to. Tybalt I'm talking.
Tybalt. No, Tybalt's part of the conversation. You dummy.
Like, you have no idea how you would respond if you were expected to serve someone like this. Like, it's so gross. So I just feel very bad for Amathera. And then she has to get paired off with Julin, who is subpar at best. Yeah. So R.I.P. to her character.
Oh, Amathera. Hardly did we know thee.
Yeah.
Matt getting more and more pissed off because more and more people are telling him. At one point, someone's like, oh, you got some mud there. You better clean it off. And he's like, what mud? Fuck off.
Yeah.
He walks into Tylen's room, and this is a comedic moment. He, like, walks in, flings his hat across across the room, and is basically, like, about to say, you'll never believe the day I...
Yeah.
Starts saying something when he realizes that Tylen is actively, like, having tea with Sarath, who is, in Matt's view, the main Shanshan person, the leader of the Shanshan Forerunners, and then this veiled individual who Matt mistakes initially for a little girl. Which is not good. By the way. Just by the way.
Robert Jordan's insistence that Tuan looks like a child is so deeply fucked up.
Yeah, very, very weird. I don't know what layers are going on there, but none of them are good. Anyway, Matt sort of takes in this situation and is like, hello? What the? Hello? What the fuck? And I can't remember the order of this situation, so I'll just try to hit the important points. Anath is there, which means Semiraj, one of the Forsaken, is there.
In the room.
And presumably recognizes Matt. Does absolutely nothing about it. Classic. This is why Semiraj is my favorite.
Just like, whatever.
Argument. Semiraj is just like, can't be bothered.
What's he gonna do?
Look at him. He's
covered in mud.
And then he completely ruins all her plans, I believe. So
nice. Good
for him.
You had the chance, Semiraj.
And you just didn't. Matt is not really introduced to Tuan, but he learns who Tuan is by her name, Tuan, and not as the daughter of the Nine Moons. This is because Tuan has entered the city under a veil, which in Shanshan culture basically means that she is doing this sort of extended form of penance, where she has not assumed her full position. And her penance is for beating one of the Daman unjustifiably, she recognizes, because the Daman was like a fortune teller and told her a fortune that she didn't like.
Yeah.
Later we'll find out, I think, past where you are, so Knife of Dreams, spoiler alert, I guess. We'll later find out that this little prophecy that was given to Tuan was sort of the reverse equivalent of, you'll marry the daughter of the Nine Moons. You know, she was basically told she'll marry a man who, the fox who makes the ravens fly, which explains Tuan's interest in Matt's ring. In this scene, which is engraved with a fox and ravens, So there's a sort of dramatic recognition and disguise thing going on here, where Matt is meeting his fated wife, but does not yet realize it, and Tuan is meeting her fated husband, and on some level realizes it, but is going to spend the next few months resisting that. And that's the sort of thing that, you know, we see in Shakespeare or more or less in like operas and these old-fashioned fairy tales. There are these big scenes of recognition and revelation, you know, when people who were in disguise or reveal themselves, da-da-da-da-da. So that's archetypically what's going on with Robert Jordan here. So Tuon isn't really treated as the daughter of the Nine Moons or referred to that way, and Matt doesn't understand at all what her position is, nor does Tylan. Tylan's like, yeah, I don't really know who she is, except Saroth sort of reacts to her like she's in charge. And everyone is confused by Anoth, who I guess even by Seanchan standards is acting like a bitch for a truth speaker or whatever. So everyone's just like, what the hell is this woman doing?
What the hell is Semiraj
What the hell is Semiraj doing? When Matt enters the room, Tuon is like, oh my god, this man's been accosted, because he looks like he's been beat up and flung through the mud, which he has.
Yeah.
She's like, I thought the streets were supposed to be safe, Saroth. And Saroth is like, oh, panics, because she's getting called out on bad city management or something. Which makes Tylan panic, and Matt is like, ooh. So he's like, oh, I'm fine, really. I just fell. Which is the classic.
Yeah, I just fell down a flight of stairs.
The classic excuse for visible bruises, and sadly is what a lot of abuse victims say, which is fitting, because Matt is himself being abused and on some level disguising that fact. Mm-hmm. But Matt's like, yeah, it's really no big deal. Like, don't worry about it. And he's obviously talking to Tuon the way he would talk to anyone, which is not the way you would talk to a high-ranking Seanchan. So everyone's like, squeeze me? Tuon herself approaches him, sees his ring, like I said, and is basically just like, what the fuck are you? She's like, Tylan, I'll pay you for him. And Tylan's like, and Matt is like, oh. Tylan's like, he's actually not for sale, because he is a free man. And Tuon's like, oh dang, and goes about her business. And Matt's like, I don't even fully understand the bullet I just dodged, but I do understand that Matrix, like, I did just dodge a bullet.
Yeah.
So, first impressions of wifey, she did try to buy me, like into a slave.
Yeah. Also says she inspects him basically like a horse.
Like a horse.
Which is disgusting, and calls to mind the type of inspections they used to do of slaves on the auction block, where they would, like, inspect them like animals.
Yeah, during the times of chattel slavery.
Yes, sorry, thank you for clarifying. So, Tuon's just digging... Robert Jordan is digging Tuon an incredibly big hole that she will, I think, never get out of, in my perspective, at this point.
Yeah, you described her as a slaver last week, and I think that is probably the best shorthand for Tuon's general behavior, and sort of the way she interacts with people who are of a lower rank than her, and also towards, like, Matt and Damani generally. It's very creepy. It is, I think, what you remember when the guys who wrote Game of Thrones were like, oh, actually, we want to write an alternate history where the Confederates won the Civil War, and there will be a torrid love affair between an enslaved woman and her enslaver, da-da-da-da-da. Obviously, Matt himself is not specifically enslaved under Tuon, nor is he enslaved generally, although he is in a very rough captivity-related situation. So it's not quite that, but it does call to mind that, because those are some of the vibes that Tuon is bringing to the table. And so it's not fun or romantic or cute at all. It is extremely mythological and archetypical. Robert Jordan has done a lot with that. Just to, like, get this out of the way, we've talked about Matt as, like, a trickster figure. Matt also has God of Wealth type things going on, where he is, like, gold is attracted to him. It's almost like he's King Midas. Tuon, on the other hand, her full name is Fortuona, which reminds one of fortune.
Yeah.
Matt describes her constantly as having a face and an expression like a judge or like an executioner. And she also is extremely wealthy. Matt, seeing her for the first time, is not at all attracted to her, which I think is sort of interesting in terms of who Matt is as a person.
Yeah.
And as a quote-unquote womanizer.
Yeah.
To not be attracted to her initially. That's probably one of the only things that I find at all interesting about their relationship, that he becomes attracted to her intellectually before physically.
Yeah.
But he is just like, oh my god, she is dripping in jewels and gems. And Matt is just like,
give to
me. That little magpie part of his brain.
Yeah.
So, Tuon is sort of in this position as, like, Hades in a way. Or Pluto, who is the Roman equivalent of Hades, but has more connotations as, like, a god of wealth.
Yeah.
The jewels under the earth. And, of course, Hades is in charge of the dead and the judging of the dead. So we have here a situation where Matt will eventually kidnap Tuon, which is like Hades kidnapping Persephone. But, reversed. Persephone kidnapping Hades, I guess. Except that Matt also has Hades connotations, so...
Hades kidnapping Hades.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
That is sort of surface level what's going on mythologically, archetypically. Robert Jordan has clearly put a lot of thought into that. All of that would work and be really interesting and fun, I would say, if Tuon wasn't who she is, which is an enslaver. Mm-hmm. And that is just sort of the insurmountable hurdle that we will be facing for the next 6 books.
Yeah. Insurmountable indeed.
Yeah, you really just can't get over it.
Yeah, she is an enslaver, she is a dictator, she's got fascist and authoritarian leanings. She's also just kind of an asshole.
Yeah.
On top of,
not nice.
like all of that like very rude behavior of hers can be dialed into the fact that she's got authoritarian tendencies and believes that she is better than people. And it's just like, God, this is so gross to just like throw Matt into this situation. But it is frustrating that this is a thing, but it is a thing. Like, there was recently, like, a big controversy because someone was publishing yet another Nazi romance where someone on the side of, like, America or the good guys falls in love with a Nazi officer, or I think have been even worse ones where, like, a Jewish woman in a camp falls in love with a Nazi officer, and it's just like, what is this fascination?
Yeah, that's a real romance trope in the romance genre specifically, but you also see it in literally any type of book that has romance in it. Mm-hmm. What comes to mind is, like, that book you read for your thesis, Wolf by Wolf.
Yes.
Which is about an alternate history wherein the Germans won World War II.
Correct, yes.
And involves a Jewish protagonist girl who sort of has a romantic relationship with a former Nazi.
And in the second book they get together officially. He repents his Nazi ways.
Yeah, and it's, you've got this sort of like, oh, I will save or redeem the former bad guy through our love. This also happens, more of you are probably familiar with this book, Six of Crows, the relationship between Matthias and Nina, oppressor, oppressed, etc., etc.
Yeah, I find it really I find it a really disgusting trope.
Yeah, it's like an immediate turnoff.
Yeah, for me I'm like, ugh. But if I try and like remove myself and like look at the analysis, I think it exists because it is a really obvious way to play with power dynamics.
Yeah.
Which is what the romance genre is about in many ways, particularly like how do you upend power dynamics. I think we're often seeing that, or like I just think power dynamics, in my admittedly limited interaction with the romance genre, you see that happening where it's like just that kind of is playing its part. But I think in Western society, I'm not as familiar with literature of other cultures, but I think in relationships that is a big deal for people anyway. Like, people are always thinking about power dynamics and how to get power over the other person.
Everything is about sex except sex, which is about power. Thank you, Janelle.
So I think that's where it's coming think that's in part where it's coming from. I also think there's a savior complex, which also plays a big part in romance. It'll often be like saving this guy and like humanizing him, and that's like sexy or whatever. And I think like if you make him as bad a person as possible, a Nazi or a slaver or a fantasy Nazi in Six of Crows, that just like makes it so much more powerful. But it's really a horrifying thing if you think about it. It's like the prize of your redemption is a woman's body. Mm-hmm. It's like, ugh.
And like those are all the tropes that we're working with here, and we're giving a double layer of how disturbing this is, because Robert Jordan is not trying to use Matt to redeem Tuon. Robert Jordan doesn't see a problem with Tuon the way we do.
No.
Matt and Tuon's relationship is less about Matt redeeming Tuon or vice versa than them meeting in the middle.
Yep.
And arguably a lot further on Tuon's side of the middle than on Matt's side.
Yeah, Matt has to get folded into the Shanshan nobility.
Yeah, which is very troubling.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that a lot more. I think we'll also talk a lot more about my complicated relationship with Tuon and how it has changed over the years. But we don't really have time for that.
Yeah, sorry, right, I've been running my mouth about power dynamics. So.
I think it's really interesting. But that's their first meeting.
Yes.
Matt embarrasses Tylan, I guess, in front of these very important Shanshan ladies. So Tylan is like, as punishment, here's our BDSM relationship. I'll tie you up and do sexy things to you. Da 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 da. And it's like, gross. Gross, gross, gross.
It's also not how BDSM works.
It's also not BDSM. I'll fucking...
Yeah, maybe, like, read a fucking book, Robert Jordan. I don't know.
I know, God.
Oh.
Stop completing BDSM with rape. Different things. Totally different things. Speaking of power dynamics in sex. One is consensual, one is not.
One is consensual. And in fact, BDSM is probably one of the most consensual forms of sex you can have.
So
because you have to have so many conversations around what each person
so
is
many
comfortable
layers
with.
Of consent. Yeah, if you're doing it right. I hope you are. I don't know who I'm speaking to.
All of our listeners in the BDSM community.
I know all of you are somehow tangentially related to it. Anyway, the next chapter is as I have alluded to, montage style, where we just get Matt over the next week or two.
Yep.
He says it as the next few days after the Galam attack. Hitting the major points. Beslin and Tom continue to conspire to do some sort of revolution against the Shanshan. One day more to revolution. Matt is... Don't sue me, Les Mis. Matt is...
Victor Hugo is gonna rise from the ground.
How dare you? Who wrote the music for Les Mis?
I don't know. You keep talking, I'll find out.
Look it up. I better not be like Andrew Lloyd Webber. No.
He will sue you.
Yeah, he would sue me. Very litigious, as everyone knows. Andrew Lloyd Webber.
I don't know anything about Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Me neither. Matt is continually more and more annoyed by Tom and Beslin's behavior, but is like, whatever, I can't do anything about it. He is also concerned and annoyed by Julian's continuing love affair with what Matt assumes to be a Shanshan noblewoman, or someone otherwise, like, within the Shanshan hierarchy, who Julian, as a person outside of the hierarchy, and particularly as a low-born person, a peasant, should not be mixing with. Julian at some point, like, gets caught where he shouldn't be and is whipped publicly, which is gross.
Yeah.
And Matt sort of has this, like, resigned attitude about it, where he's just like, Julian's a man, like, Julian's a person, an adult. I cannot physically stop him from doing something that is bad for him, so...
Yeah.
You just kind of gotta let your friends make potentially lethal mistakes, I guess. Matt eventually goes to Satalanon's Inn, which is just like across from the Terrasen Palace, because he remembers, oh, there was a place in the inn where, like, my money chest was kept while I was a patron there. Did you find out who wrote Les Mis?
Yeah, I don't know, some French guy, Claude Michel Schoenberg, and then they've got some French guys who did the original French lyrics, and then Herbert Kretzmer did the English lyrics.
Lame.
I don't know who any of these people are.
I just wanted to make fun of Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Well, there's always Cats. You can always make fun of him for that.
And boy, isn't it mockable. So Matt goes to the inn, which now is full of Shanshan patrons, it being a very nice inn. He runs into Satalanan, and besides the whole Satalanan making him twirl to show his ass, or whatever is going on there, they have what is, I think, most delightful about Matt and Satalanan, which is that they are very much peers. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit like Brigitte.
Yes.
Matt clearly understands Satalanan is a woman and is not just like one of the guys, but, I don't know, they just treat each other with more respect than we usually get between men and women in wheelie time. So Satalanan agrees to harbor Matt's fugitive money and clothes.
Yeah.
Because, as she says, it is ethically wrong what Tylan is doing to Matt.
Yeah.
In fact, like, Matt's like, what can I pay you? And she's like, just twirl, which is obviously gross on some level, but when you think of it as, like, she is not charging him actual money. She's just sort of, like, teasing him.
Yeah.
So Matt starts squirreling away money, and he finds his old clothes, though they're somewhat moth-eaten. His two serving guys, Narum and Lopin, one of whom was formerly Nalishan, R.I.P. Nalishan's manservant. They're now both Matt's men servants. Men servants. They're both now servants to Matt. And Matt is like, challenge, you guys are going to start taking, like, pieces of my clothing and little pocketfuls of money over to the Wandering Woman, which is the name of this inn. And they're like, challenge accepted. We love that.
Yeah.
They literally, like, race each other.
Yeah, and they're very cute. I like Narum and Lopin.
Speedrun. Yeah. Enemies to lovers.
Yeah! Oh my gosh, I wish. Probably wasn't a coward.
Yeah, Tylan comes in and is like, I just saw Narum and Lopin literally sprinting down the hall. And Matt's like, don't worry about it. So that's sort of like step one of Matt's escape plan, is just get his own source of money and clothing that is not monitored by Tylan.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Tuon is acting very weird. He, like, sees her around. He still doesn't fully understand her position, what she is exactly. But she and Tylan have a friendship that is developing. And so Matt runs into her occasionally, although he starts to think it is more than occasionally that she is maybe seeking him out, which kind of creeps him out, but he's not too worried about yet.
Yeah.
But, like, he walks into his own rooms at one point, and she is looking at his spear, his Ashandare, and it's like, okay, that's totally psychotic behavior. Like, you can't just go into people's rooms.
Yeah, Tuon, you freak.
But she's like, oh, is this yours? I'll pay you for it. What did you pay? And he's like, you can't pay what I paid. Unless you're
willing to die.
Yeah. Should I kill you?
It would be so funny if he said that.
Oh, do you want to die? Pulls out a knife. Immediately, a bunch of Death Watch guards tackle him from all sides. Like the Secret Service.
Yeah.
But she's just like, oh, okay, weird, and leaves. So there's just sort of, like, some weird behavior going on with Tuon throughout.
Yeah, it makes a lot more sense in the context of her also getting a prophecy that is about Matt. The fact that is not revealed to us until Knife of Dreams. Because it is, like, seems like fully psychotic behavior. I should not say that. I'm trying to be better about the word psychotic. It seems very confusing behavior when Matt's like, I'm kidnapping you, and she's like, pretty much sounds chill.
Yeah.
You're like, girl, what?
And, like, it contextualizes somewhat. It does not make it right or excuse it in any way. It contextualizes the fact that her initial reaction upon seeing him and these suspicions being evoked, that she immediately offers to buy him. Clearly, she's just like, is this the guy?
Yeah.
Of whom the prophecies have spoken?
Yeah.
And an easy way to sort of put him aside or put him in my power so I can deal with him in my own time would be to sell him within the Shanshan worldview. Especially because, you know, the alternative is just that, like, Tuon sees Matt and is like, oh, he's hot.
Yeah.
I want him to be my naked servant.
Yeah.
And Matt's just like, what's happening?
Yeah, it does.
I'm covered in mud.
It's like, this is what turns you on? You want me to be naked and covered in mud?
And me, Emily Jusha, I'm like, I do love a grimy man, but like...
Maybe.
Maybe?
No, it does it does take a little bit of the sting off of it when you realize that she's kind of got some other wheels turning. But as it stands right now, she's just like, I want to buy him and make him my naked servant for who knows what reason.
Yeah.
Sexual harassment reasons, it seems like, at this point. So...
yeah, it's a little confusing why Robert Jordan chose to leave that as a reveal.
Yeah.
Rather than just in Tuon's point of view that we got right before this.
Yeah.
Contextualizing what the prophecy was that she...
like, this is the prophecy is really confusing. Because that's when we get the reveal that she's the daughter of the 9 moons.
Yeah.
So it would make perfect sense for her to be like, I also got this weird prophecy about some fox man.
Yeah.
Who's the fox man?
Who's the fox man? What does the fox man say?
What does the fox man...
And the fox man says, it's nothing, I just fell down the stairs. Don't worry about it.
Oh, I'm so worried about this man.
I know, God bless Matt.
Matthew.
Oh, Matrim.
Matrim.
My beloved.
Matrim few.
Did I miss anything? I probably did, but...
I think we covered the big points.
Yeah.
I think so.
We'll get one more chapter from Matt's point of view specifically, and then we'll get another couple of points of view from people who will be relevant to Matt's escape. But his escape will really start coming together in the next few chapters.
We really start collecting people, just sort of like a big magnet.
Yeah, Noel is step 1, but there are many more steps to come. So those are those 2 chapters. Fun in some ways, very troubling in other ways. But that is sort of where we're going to be on that balancing scale with Matt for the next ever.
I feel like that's how, ever since we entered Abu Dar, I feel like that's how it's been.
Yeah.
So, kind of hard to cut the cake one way or the other.
Yeah, poor Matt. That's it from me. Do you have anything to add?
I do not.
Okay.
As always, I think I have said enough. I think there's been plenty out of this hot bag of air.
Stop. Thanks for listening. Thank you to Glenna McKenzie for our theme song, to our patrons on Patreon and our followers on social media.
We just did a rendition, whatever, of our other podcast on Patreon, We Don't Watch Outlander, watching cinematic classic, The Mummy, 1999.
Yeah, starring Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz. Sarah, my sister, saw a bumper sticker out in the wild one time, or saw it on the internet or something, that just said, I'd rather be watching The Mummy, starring Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz, and was like, I have to find it for you.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, that is the single bumper sticker I would allow on my car. I'm not a bumper sticker person, but...
so if you've been thinking about joining our Patreon,
there it is.
There's the carrot.
Yeah.
In front of your little donkey cart.
That's it.
That's all, folks.
Okay. Sorry, guys, for the weird energy.
Me.
Have a good week. Bye.